This is the fourth share. Right?
Okay, so we're ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so we left off that he was in the middle of explaining the question of how can we understand what the Zohar says that Havaya and Elokim are kul echad, that the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which represents infinite revelation, kindness, compassion, the name Elokim, which represents concealment and limitation, and the source, which is the source of all division and multiplicity in the world. How could it be that the Zohar is telling us that Havaya and Elokim are kul echad? Now, the fact that we believe that Hashem echad, that's something that Jews believed for thousands of years before the Zohar ever was published. So that he's not questioning that belief, chas v'shalom, even though we would need to understand that too. But he's saying that's not a problem. We understand that one Eibishter can express himself in two different modes of expression. The question is that the Zohar is adding to that we know from the Chumash, says Hashem Elokim, Hashem Echad. We know that's not news to us. The news is that he's saying kul echad means that he's saying it's not two separate modes of expression. That somehow is all one. So he's emphasizing the distinction between the two to sharpen the question. We haven't gotten to an answer yet. So far he got us to the point where he was explaining how Kabbalah speaks about Havaya and Elokim in the context of Havaya being the source of the Oros, the divine light, and Elokim being the source of Kalim, the vessels which contain and communicate further that divine light. So the question was, a question that he's in the middle of he's about to finish developing the question, at least as it is for this maamar. So he problem is that the function of the vessels is to conceal. Now, even though he said it's true that the vessels also serve to reveal, the kelim also serve to reveal. They pass along the light. They reveal the light to an extent, which is what every vessel's job is, not just to contain, but also to pass along the contents. But still, no, the fact that not only does it limit and conceal, what it does reveal is specifically something that's limited, and so it's clearly not revealing the original light. What it's revealing is only a glimmer of that original light. So, and he said, in fact, it's because it's covering up the main light, because the main light cannot be received. That's the essence, the light in and of itself cannot be received. Only an external glimmer of that light can be received. So that by covering up the light itself, it's able to pass along this glimmer on a limited scale. So the last few words that we read in the previous shir was on page Mem Zayin. We said the Zel Klal Gadol, that this is a great general rule. Shekol Gilui Ha'etzem Hu Helam L'Gabi Hazulas, V'Helam Ha'atzmi Hu Gilui L'Gabi Hazulas. That the revelation of the Etzem is a concealment relative to other, whereas the concealment of the essence is revelation relative towards other, in relation to other. So it's a sugya for itself. It comes up in many different angles and many different contexts, but on the most simple level, this great rule is that the essence of a thing, actually in the language of the Rishonim, that like the Rambam and others who got involved in philosophy, trying to explain Jewish precepts in the language of the philosophers. So that's actually the source of using the word etzem to mean anything else, to mean beyond the literal meaning of a bone. The etzem, that the etzem of a thing is the essence of a thing, that actually is from the language of those early Rishonim or Rebbe Rashab and others, that they borrowed this terminology and created sort of this language for Jewish philosophy, and they used this word etzem. So they used the word etzem as opposed to what they call a mikra. So the way, in fact, the way the Rambam explains the significance of the number 10 in creation and in the universe is that everything in reality is made up of an etzem, the tesha mikra. A mikra, we use the word mikra to mean like a coincidence or some happenstance, but he's using
events. He's using as events.
He's using a mikra as something which it could be in many different forms. It happens to be in this form.
Occurrence.
So, for example, you can have a table, right? A table can be long, a table could be short, the table could be tall, the table could be short, the table could be square, it could be rectangle, it could be round, it could be round, it could have 4 legs, it could have 3 legs, it could be made of all kinds it has many different, but we're all still a table. And in fact, one of the things that those who are working on artificial intelligence have still never realized that they'll never really be able to get to artificial intelligence is that nobody has figured out how a human infant or toddler, how a human toddler, once they get the concept of table, you could show them any kind of table and they know it's a table. It's a coffee table, a lamp table, a bar, a high table with bars. You show them any kind of thing. What's even wilder is that they can do it with cats and dogs. You literally have dogs that look like cats, and you would never know, or dogs that look so different from each other, and they know. Dog.
The baby knows.
Babies, but definitely by toddlers for sure. So so what does that mean? That means somehow that the human mind is recognizing what that is. Now it has, but the Rambam talks in terms of 9 mikrim because in the 3-dimensional universe, everything has length, width, and height. So you're gonna have or depth depending on how it's structured. But everything has 3 dimensions, and every dimension has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So everything there is what it is. It is what it is, and then there's the happenstance construct. In other words, the details of its existence that express its existence can change from one thing to the next. Those are called mikra. When the Mekubalim and Chassidus are borrowing the language of the philosophers, so they use etzem more to express the idea of the core essence of a thing, which is how they're using it too. But when you're using it in terms of a sort of a higher being, a divine being, that which is, a complete personality. It has its as opposed to a table or any physical object, things that have their own reality. So the etzem is the core self. The core self is which is not even revealed to the owner of the core self. It's not revealed, it's not concealed. It's just it is. A self only becomes aware of self when there's something compelling self to to react or to act or to react. But self just being self is not revealed and is neither revealed nor concealed. It just is.
So you don't wake up in the morning and say, "What am I? Who am I?"
No, you do because you have your conscious mind is already many layers of expression further away from self. Pure self is the essence, the core self. Before it expresses itself into a brain, before it expresses itself into anything else, just being. So that which has a reality as a pure being. Etzem means that any revelation of pure being, of my pure being, is completely hidden from anyone or anything else because it's just being. My beingness, if I want to say something about myself, I want to communicate something about myself, I want to express myself in a specific way, that I'm covering up myself. Self is putting on, is packaging something to deliver to other. But if self-being self is total concealment to the other, because self-being self is just self-being self. There's no expression, there's no existence of self outside of self. So to my selfhood and your selfhood are not. There's no way the existence of my selfhood you're not aware of it unless I walk into a room in a body. But if my selfhood as existing out of a body, you'd have no idea. Even though it's more revealed in the sense of pure self, it's not covered up, then there's nothing to see. To the other, there's nothing to see. Each individual self has its own individual self.
There might be neshamas hanging around the room.
Neshamas are already also in a form to some extent. They're in a spiritual form in a spiritual world, but the pure core self is just being. Being itself. Being is not pure being is something that other has no relationship to otherness, and other has no relationship with it. It's only when I put on some form of cover-up, of packaging, that now that's something that's revealed to other. But that has to cover up pure self, because pure self is not something that has any point of contact with other or otherness.
I guess, the simple conclusion that there's only real one being, right? Because anytime you start breaking it down into me and you,
well, okay, that's we're gonna. Okay, we'll okay. We'll actually see more. We'll actually see how we have that balance between existence and non-existence is how everything's all one, and yet there are distinct existences. We'll see as we go into maamar, even though that's not the main emphasis. There are other maamar that deal with that more extensively. But here he's addressing with this. He's still focused on his thing. What does it mean? Havai and Elokim are all one, and how is that knowledge supposed to impact us, and what connection that has with the events of Yitzis Mitzrayim and going into Eretz Yisrael? That's really where he's putting his focus. So what's this knowledge that we need to have, and how is it something that we're supposed to take to heart and put into practice in our everyday lives? So he says, all of this was understood up above in the Kelim of Atzilus, Shemalimim al Etzem Ha'er, that they cover up the essence of the light, because light in general is something that is not communicative. It's not something. It has nothing to say to anyone or anything. It has no specific message. But here, the Atzamar is certainly something that's beyond being revealed to other, and therefore the function of the Kelim Atzilus is to cover that up, and they only reveal only the external aspects of that light. V'dafka k'shemalim alera primi ba'atzmi. It is dafka when they cover up, when they conceal this inner and essential light. Oz migalim chitzeni se'er lifel pulosim kaniskal el benefeshul. That is when, as we explained more at length in the previous class, that is dafka through the cover up, or as we said here, this based on this general rule, that it's only the cover up of self that allows some limited message, communication from self to come through. So it's dafka when they conceal the inner and essential light, then it could reveal the external aspect of the light to have its effect, as we mentioned earlier regarding the nefesh, that in order for the physical brain to come up with physical ideas, even though it's a power of intellect, it's not a physical brain doing it, it's a power of intellect, but it has to be dressed up in a physical brain, otherwise it would be too removed, it could not come down and relate on that level to physicality, to the otherness of physicality. The same thing with the power of sight of the eye, would not be able to see without a physical eye the power of sight, even though it exists previously and it exists on a much higher level and it sees much higher things, but it could not limit itself to see physical things if not for the fact that it was that higher, more intense level of is covered up. That is why we use the Shem Elikim to refer to as the source of the vessels, and because that is the attribute of din and tzimtzum. It's not two separate things. That we know from the more nigla sources that Havaya is the name of Rachmim and Elikim is the name of Din. And we know from Kabbalah sources that Havaya is the source of Iris and Elikim is the source of Caleb. It's actually, that's the same thing. It's just they're explaining the Kabbalah is explaining the inner dynamics. It's not two separate explanations. It's really, that is this Midas Adin. But Tzimtzum, this attribute of Din, of judgment, and constriction, l'tzamtzim u'lahalim ha'er, to constrict, to constrain and conceal the light. She says, now that's just, we're speaking in a sense more specifically speaking specifically in terms of lights and vessels, but it's also pretty general. Here he's saying that the process of creation involves not only lights and vessels. We also mentioned in passing that between each distinct world is sort of a separation, a curtain, which we said filters the light. So it's sort of just like if you have Begashmis, you have a curtain, so the light that comes in from the outside is filtered through that curtain. You wouldn't get it with the same intensity as if the window was completely uncovered. So here in this case, although we'll see that it's also called like in this case the paris is called like a new light relative to the previous one, but he's going to explain that there are many other layers of concealment in creation, not just Kalim. So he says, so similarly all the concealments and the things that hide, cover up and conceal in the worlds, they are the curtains, the hamasachim and the screens, or masks, that separate between each and every world, and similarly there is in each world individually has its own inner parsois, this old system of separations. That there is in Atzilus itself, there is a sort of curtain filter between intellect and emotions. So just on a simple level, just basically what that means is that just like within a human being, there are actually separations between, we spoke previously about how within a person there are actually also these 4 different levels, 4 different worlds. You could actually live in different worlds. That's where you can put yourself, whether you're living in the world of wisdom or understanding or emotion or action. That's another alternative to the false world, but that's just a corrupted version of the world of understanding. But in order to be able to make the transition from the world of intellect to the world of emotions, you need a curtain, you need a separation, because the way that the light of intellect works is that it's all about the idea, and even though that there's a subject of the idea, but the subject of the idea is completely overwhelmed. It is like almost like it's nothing in the world of ideas. In the world of ideas, there's not, the main thing is the idea. The thing that it's an idea about, the concept, the main thing is the concept. So the object, the subject, has almost no existence within that world. It's all intellect. It's all me and intellect. My reality, even though the focus is not on me, the focus is trying to be objective, but it's still how I'm seeing reality, but not how, in concept, not how reality is in actuality. So I'm not really relating to the thing. I'm relating to the idea of the thing. So while the idea is there, is in its full intensity, I can't really relate to the thing. And on a very practical level, when sometimes people will consult me about parenting advice, chinuch questions, and they'll give me a whole analysis of their child. I say, yeah. I want to meet the kid's father. I want to meet the kid's mother. I don't want to meet the kid's analyst. If you're the kid's analyst, so that's a whole different kid. You have this analysis of the kid in your head, and you're relating to your analysis. I want to meet the mother. I want to meet the father. I don't want to meet another person with another analysis, just because you think you may have a better analysis than somebody else. But while you're analyzing, you're not really relating. You're not really connecting emotionally. So you sort of have to shut down the. Even Megashmi is one of the reasons why people have a really hard time going from studying medical books to dealing with patients. They may have been the top student in medical school, and they were there, and then when they start meeting patients, they're like, get me out of here. This is, even though the whole thing was in order to meet the patient, you wanted to be a doctor. You didn't just want to be a researcher. But a lot of guys say that I'm going to be a researcher, because they can't make that transition from the world of ideas to the world of actually of making emotional connections. So there has to be internally, you have to be able to have separations. So that's just a mashal, a mila, that in order for there to be midas, which is already the beginning of relating to other, not just conceptualizing other, but actually relating to other on an emotional level, within the divine.
Ideally, you don't want those cartoons. You do want to connect the idea that you had of being a doctor and meet the patient.
No, but if you focus, if you're lost in your head, then you can't be with the patient.
Yes, but if you're not going to connect the idea with the
Again,
practice,
what you want to be able to do, you want to shut it down, be able to pick and choose what you need in order to be able to actually treat the patient. You may have to go back into your brain to figure out what you need. But right now, when you're connecting with the patient, you're not bringing your whole internally. You have to make a separation. You always have to do that. You could take the bottom line of what your intellect understands. In fact, Chassidus says that the only thing that you're supposed to take from the Moshe when you're working on the midas is what's called the bechein. The therefore. Okay, you thought it all out, you worked it all out. What's the therefore? You know what the therefore is? You know what the bottom line is? Now, work with that. But the whole intellectual process, that has to stay in that world, because if it's too much comes through, then you can't be emoting now. If you're up in your own head, you're not connecting down emotionally to somebody else. And by the way, not when the other person's in the room. When you're by yourself, when you're up in your head, you're not emoting. You can have emotions towards somebody else even when they're not in the room with you, right? You don't have they don't have to be there. You have to think about the people who you care about and the people who do this and events and things that generate a lot of emotion. But you have to get, when you're in your head, you're not in your emotion world. When you're in the emotion world, you're not in your head world. How those worlds are integrated properly, so this talks about that process a lot. But for the most part, there has to be this separation. It's essential. So that's just one example of an individual process, not so really negated to what we're learning, but just I don't want it to be like we're just running over things. So he says the same thing applies between the different worlds, which are also similar to the, as we said, structured like the internal structure of an individual world. That's how all the worlds are structured. And there's a parsa that separates between Atzilus and Bria. And similarly, in Bria, there are these curtains between the different levels. Within Bria itself, Bria has its intellect and its emotions, and it needs its separations. And all of that, so even though we've just very generally said Iris and Kalim, but the fact is that Kalim covers a lot more than just the technical Kalim of the spheres. Kalim covers everything that exists in the world that serves as a function of concealing divine light in the creative process. That's all comes from Shem Elikim. All the revelations of the world, all the revelations of the world, they come from the name Havaya Yudke Vavke, based on what we said before, on everything we've said before. You're telling me they're all one. I'm telling you, based on what we said till now, they're actually opposites of each other. The Zemakar Agiloi, this one is the source of revelation. The Zemakar Ahester, this one is the source of concealment. The Eichem Kulachat. That leaves us with the big question of the day. How can we say that they're all one? We don't have a problem with saying that one God can operate through two different modes of operation and expression. We have a problem. How do we say that they're not really two different things? They themselves are really all one. So now he's going to take us to the answer. And it says in the pasuk, I think in Iyov, it says, "Mipsari echzel leka," from my flesh I perceive God. And he adds in as a parenthetical comment, what does it mean you could see? He's not getting into, Chassidus talks about this again in much more detail and length in other places. Here he just gives you a small parenthetical comment. It says, let us make man in our form and like our image. That the Adam is made, the Jewish soul, or the actual physical in a body, the actual human being, is made in the form and image of as it is up above. That is why, from the faculties and the powers of the soul, we can understand how things are up above. So that's, he just doesn't want to get into that whole thing. That's a general rule we use in Chassidus. Having a proper understanding of Keches HaNefesh will allow us to understand how things are up above. The Rebbe had mentioned I think on more than one occasion I did, that it doesn't mean necessarily that you and I could start making up things about what's going on in the higher worlds based on the fact that we think we understand how the human soul functions. No, you have to have a direct Messiah from above. You have to. One time the Rebbe even used the expression like, "How does the Alter Rebbe know this?" You know, maybe heard it from God Himself. I mean, that's like. But the point is that you have to have the knowledge come to you from the source up above. And now that you were told that, now looking at these analogies of the will help you understand.
It's like gematria. You're not learning halacha from it. Once you learn the halacha, you could make a sign with the...
But no, here it's more. I'm saying this is going to actually help you understand it. So you can't make things up based on it. But once you hear it and you can see a tangible example of it, so you understand it much better. I can see that in actual, tangible way. So I understand that, right? A person has two hands, a right hand and a left hand, and the right hand is more about is stronger and it's more about giving. So you explain how that's a marshal for a godly concept, and then you give me in a certain way. I have more of a handle on it because it's not just pure abstract. I have a marshal. A tangible marshal. So the more tangible the marshal is to me, the more I have an understanding of it. But it's not that I can necessarily myself work my way back, figure things out just from looking at myself. So now he's going to explain how these two, how revelation and concealment in the Keches HaNefesh will give us an insight to understand how it's the fact is that in the faculties of the soul, there is also the power of revelation and the power of limitation and concealment, or what we might call self-expression and self-restraint. But more than just self-restraint, it's also the ability to limit and package that communication or that function. So he's going to give as an illustration, which somebody once came to me with it was a sikh of the Rebbe, look at the sikhs, but one of the more what they call Hasidic sikhs. It was more
not a Rashi.
Not a Rashi. They dealt with more abstract Hasidic ideas. And he came over and he asked me a question about it, and I looked at the sikh in question. I said, "Tell me, do you have a good chush in like a talent, a sense? Do you feel like that you have a chush in understanding the mishalim of Keches HaNefesh that Chassidus uses?" He said, "Not at all." I don't relate at all. I said, okay, so when you're asking me this question, you don't want like the whole, you just want to know technically like the words. Yeah, that's all I want to know. Sometimes there's sometimes the mush that's supposed to make it easier to understand, not everybody is able to understand what's going on and relate to what's going on inside themselves. But that's what we have. Just like we have a power of intellect to conceive, to intellectually conceive intellectual concepts and ideas. So the mind has the ability to conceive all sorts of ideas and concepts. So hareyu nimshach mikayach hamaskil shebenefesh. Where does that come from? You decide you want to come up with an idea. So think about the thing that you want to come up with an idea about, and puff, look at that, you came up with an idea. Where did that come from? What do you mean you can come up with an idea? Or you're studying something and you're trying to come up with so what's the point of all, what's the one idea that puts all of these pieces together? I'm trying to get that. And so you think about it because you don't know. You don't have the idea. And then now you do. So where does that come from? So he says there's a power. Obviously, it's coming from you have some power to do that, right? Or even to take something, I really don't understand it. So, back and forth. If you don't understand, you don't understand. Where's the understanding going to come from? You don't understand it. Well, no. I have to think about it. What's going to happen? Where's the new understanding going to come from? The answer is there's something called the koyach hamaskil, the power to conceive, to produce ideas and understanding. You have this. So that power exists before the idea came along. You're not consciously using that power. You're sort of consciously knocking on the door, saying, I need an idea. I need an understanding. This is the topic. This is the problem. You're sort of like knocking on the door, but you have no idea how to start it, do it, when it's going to work, when it's not going to work, when it's going to. You have like no direct awareness of it. You have no direct handle on it. You have no direct control on it, but it's there, and that's the. Shukayach hiyuli al kolmine giluyei sichlius. This is a kayach hiyuli. It's which is based on a Greek word, I think, hilos, which we use in modern English for all kinds of helicopter things, which really means like air. But they used it to mean something that's in a state of abstract potential. That something that's in a state of abstract potential. So everything that's going to come from there comes from everything that is coming from there. But what's up there is like this big room with a lot of ideas and understandings. Oh, which one do you need? You need this idea. You need that. No, the idea didn't exist yet. You're conceiving it. It's just there, everything there, it's just in a form of abstract potential.
Even simpler, what about...
To produce intellection. I mean, through engaging in intellection, to produce intellectual ideas or understanding.
How about an idea that, like sometimes you want to remember something, the name of somebody. So what is, even though it's stored, how do you unlock that storage?
That's memory storage is different. Memory storage is a different.
But the will that
memory storage is a different thing. There are tricks. There are ways to. The more you use it, the more you review it, the deeper an impact you make. Memory has a whole different mechanic. Here we're talking about literally consuming ideas in the world of pure ideas. So in the world of pure ideas, so we know we have this power. It's coming from somewhere. There's a power, but that power is completely abstract. It has no. It's just the potential for all types of revelation of intellectual stuff. That everything that the mind produces is drawn from the koyach hamaskil, as is known, discussed in amazingly great detail in many, many other places. I just gave you the abbreviated form because that's really not so negaya. He wants to use this as a mashal. So obviously it has the power to reveal ulegalis kol gilui seichel. V'eschakmos be'eze davar muskel.
You can either teach the kid to swim or just throw him in the pool and let him start swimming. That's the koyach hayuli.
Doesn't necessarily work the same way. That's a different mechanism.
Skill, it's not an idea.
So he says that this koyach hamaskil,
he never taught him.
this koyach hamaskil certainly has the power of revelation, which is to reveal, to express itself, to reveal all revelations of intellect, and his chakmos be'ezadav muskel. So sometimes he's saying, it's Chakus V'yodaita Moskve means that I sometimes have to go to my Koyach HaMaskil not to give me a new idea, but to give me the insight into an existing idea. There's a concept that I'm considering, and sometimes you get not a brand new idea out of it. You get a new insight, a new flash of insight into this idea that you're studying. So it's revelation. Just I was contemplating, thinking about, and trying to gain insight into this thing, and now I go, wow! I got a whole new insight, a whole new appreciation for the thing that I had before. So this is all coming. It's just these are all forms of revelation. It also has in it the power to impose limitations, to limit every piece of intellect. Every piece of intellect you're going to conceive, you can't just reveal pure intellect. You're starting with unlimited potential for ideas. You have to be able to limit and define your idea. It has to be able to be limited and constrained. Ukiyodua de kol seichel usvara behechlich sheyiyeh gvul hispashtusa. It is known that every intellectual idea and every svara, perforce, it must be that there has to be a limitation to how far it extends. The ad paisavai, it only goes this far. The sulaya, not more. So he's using seichel and svara differently because svara is when you're considering different sides of an issue. When you're considering different sides of an issue, so you have sometimes conflicting reasonings. So svara means I could say go this way or go that way. That's usually based on some reasoning. So he's saying that you have to be able to define and place limits on the idea and on the svara, or otherwise everything's going to go off, as he explains. If a person is going to take a svara too far, you take it too far, you're only going to end up going on a crooked road with that, because you're going to get and it will not be true. In fact, it's an old trick in debating that's been around for since forever. I think it actually goes back to the time of the Greeks. They had an expression. It's called I don't remember the first, something ad absurdum, where you're trying to debate two sides of an issue. So if you want to make the other person's argument look ridiculous, you take it to its extreme. You take it to its extreme. Oh, so based on what you're saying, you just said if such and such life is not worth living, so we should all kill ourselves, right? That's what you're saying. You take somebody says an idea and you want to make it look ridiculous, you take it, you paint it in its most extreme form, and that way it's going to look ridiculous. He says, and it's true, it is ridiculous, because it's not meant to go. You're talking about, you're in a situation where you're not dealing with absolutes. You're dealing with, I could go this way, I can go that way. The question is, which way is more compelling of the two ways? So if you had clear absolutes, so you'd have clear absolutes. If you don't have a clear absolute, so now you have to have, the svara has to be, okay, so this is the way we're going to go, but up to this point. Because beyond this point, now we're in a whole different territory. This svara doesn't cover that issue. It only goes there. And just for yourself as well, if you're going to take an idea and run with it too far, you're going to fall off the end of the earth. So, in fact, if many people who movements that have tried to take halacha and water it down, what they'll try to do the same idea also. They'll take a halachic concept and sort of like take it to its extreme. So they'll say, oh, pikuach nefesh is deichel entire Torah. You know, if I'm going to feel bad about myself, that could lead to suicide. So I shouldn't do anything on Shabbos. I shouldn't keep anything about Shabbos that might make me feel bad about myself. You know, so they'll do things like that. You know, based on halacha, right? We're using the concept of halacha. No, obviously we know that applies only in such situations, and in other situations, it cannot just be used as a blanket thing. So you have to know, in intellect, it's not just enough to have an idea. You have to be able to define it and figure out where its borders are. So that same power that produced the idea has within it a power to tell you, oh, no, up to here, not further. You can't. You have to tell you where to stop, where the borders of the idea are. So he says, "V'chein b'tziruf kama svaros," and this also applies that you have to have the power of limitation when you're combining a number of svaros. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation, especially in halacha, where you're combining a number of svaros. K'sheyesh svaros noitis laheta, svaros le'isa. You have some svaros leaning to permit the thing, and some svaros leaning to prohibit. So now, and you have a combination of reasons for each one. So now you're working with combinations of reasons and two sides. If you can't really define where each reasoning begins and ends, you have combinations of arguments on this side and a combination of arguments on that side. How are you ever in the world if you don't know? Okay, so this is.
You have that in the Gemara, no?
There's no way you could come to a psak unless you can clearly define. Yes, this is in Nigla and Halacha. Those who are above, those who learn Nigla B'Iyan will have a better understanding of this mashal. So he says, so you have this. You're never going to be able to come to a conclusion. How can you come to a conclusion unless you can clearly define each side and which is ultimately the more compelling side? V'hainu, which is to say, to actually draw a conclusion from a sugya in Gemara, a sugya in Torah, according to halacha, to come out with the final halacha, in order to learn a piece of Gemara, Rashi, Tais, V'shainim, and then the Paiskim, and you're going to come out from that. Okay, so in this case, the halacha should be this. That's impossible unless the svaros are very clearly limited. Then you could see which one seems more compelling, which one seems a stronger argument than the other. But only when you have a very clearly defined sense of where each one begins and ends. It's only when he could clearly define each side, balance them against each other, see which is more compelling, then he can actually come to a conclusion and a final psak. So he says that now he gets into territory that's more familiar, more commonly used in Chassidus. And the same thing applies in a mashpia and a mekabel, that a mashpia and mekabel of Chassidus, in most cases, is about the mashpia and mekabel of giving tzedakah and receiving tzedakah. Sometimes that happens. Usually when Chassidus talks about mashpia and mekabel, it's talking about a mashpia who's trying to convey deep ideas and concepts to the mekabel, to the recipient, as it is here in this case as well. When we're talking about a mashpia and a mekabel of seichel, it is absolute. It's an absolute necessity. It's a must that the mashpia should constrain and conceal and impose limitations on his intellect, in order that it should be able to be received by the mekabel, by the one on the receiving end. The teacher has to impose, has to constrain and conceal and limit his intellect in order for the recipient to get it. Because if he will reveal to him the essence of his intellect as it is by him, the idea itself as it is in his own mind, he would not be able to receive it because he's not, and he must conceal the essence of his intellect, and to reveal to him only that which is relative to his intellectual world, his intellectual capacities, his abilities and capacities. And not only does he have to adapt it to bring it down to his meaning, to bring it down to his level. That's what he has to be able to bring it down to his level.
You're basically channeling that right now.
I'm sorry?
You're basically channeling that right now.
Trying. I don't know if I have.
You must relate directly.
I don't know how much my seichel is beyond anybody else's, and I don't know how much whatever little bit I have, I'm trying to pass along. So he says like this, that he also has to constrain his own intellect within himself, that it should not extend itself more than proper. Even as the idea is for himself, he has to hold himself back from delving even deeper and going even further in his understanding of the Seichel. Oh, stop, hold up. I'm right now. I'm trying to communicate something to some. I'm trying to communicate to my student. If I'm going to keep going off in then I will not be able to. He certainly will not be able to receive it. I'm trying to take what I already understand, what I already know, what I already can see, and bring it down to him. I certainly can't let it get. So I have to constrain myself, my own intellect. Because if he's going to go too far with it, it will not be in the erech of the keli of the mekabel. He's going to completely lose the train. If I'm going to keep going and going and going, the listener would just be like.
So is it a problem with him as the mashpia that he's not able to reach the mekabel?
No, he's not saying it's a problem. He's saying what you need to do. You need to have these two powers: the power to reveal. You have to have the power to limit and conceal and constrain. He's saying no, to be an effective mashpia. You must have the power of restraint. You must have the power of self-restraint. You can't express yourself, you can't express your ideas, unless you have the power to impose that restraint and limit on those same ideas.
And you were saying the restraint comes from halacha?
I didn't say restraint comes. I said no. Kayach Hamas. That same power that has the ability to produce ideas has also the ability to define them and limit them. And no, we're not talking about no kalim here yet. We're not talking about kalim. We're talking about the power of intellect relative to itself.
I'm saying
to
right,
yourself.
like we said for the mushroom. We said
No. We didn't say that. We didn't get the Ataris Kalim. He's going to try to see how we can apply that.
Right.
But here we're saying just within the world of pure ideas. In my own circle, I have this ability to produce ideas and have the ability to constrain them and impose limits on those same ideas, and they're coming from the thing, the kayach, the whatever the stuff comes from. There's also comes with it an ability to say, okay, that only goes to this point. That only goes to this point. To know and to limit. And it's even more pronounced when I'm trying to communicate it to somebody else. To have that ability to take my knowledge and understanding, my insight and my understanding to communicate to others, to have that ability to impose limits on it inside myself. I'm not talking yet to the Megam. Before I got to the Megam, before I said a word, I'm starting the process of imposing the limits inside myself. This is all me. It's not yet anybody else. There's no Kaylee, there's no anything. I'm trying to adapt a message. There's the idea as I understand it. Now I'm trying to see how will I take that idea and be able to communicate it to so-and-so, to my student. And I have to already start limiting and restricting and defining, imposing limits on it, all inside me. So in me, not to the outside. Within me, I have the power of revelation and the power of restraint inside myself.
So before you say something, you should think about what you're going to say. I mean, basically.
Well, obviously, you're going to have to. How far you want to go? I don't know. How far you want to go? When somebody asks you how you're doing, you want to tell them your whole life story?
I'm saying some people have.
So in your mind, right? You stop and think. Okay, how well do I know this guy? How much do I think this guy is interested in me? How much do I think he wants to know? And based on that, you're going to tell him how you're doing. You see? Okay.
All right.
Okay, see ya. You're going to say, whatever. Or you're going to say, how am I doing? I'm saying anytime you're communicating, before you communicate anything, here he's talking about more within the realm of ideas, of abstract ideas. But on any level, you're always, inside yourself, you're always deciding how much to say out and how much to hold back. And even what you're going to say, how to package it. You see a friend, and he says, how you doing? You go, fine. Right? You see your wife, and she says, how you doing? You go, fine. She's going to be very hurt and insulted, right? So you have to, your friend might think, that was great communications. And wow, he said a lot today. Very talkative. You have different relations with different people. You have this. You're always in your mind what you're giving out and what you're holding and how you're going to package it. But here, in more abstract ideas, obviously it's much more complex because, especially the more the distance in the level of understanding of the teacher, the level of understanding of the student is a greater distance. The teacher has to work much harder inside himself. Just like in order to come to a psak halacha, he has to be able to, inside himself, not to anybody else. It's all inside himself. He has to be able to get the idea and then decide where to put the limits on the idea. This only goes so far. That's something he has to be able to do inside himself. So similarly, when he wants to communicate to somebody else, he also has to be able to limit it and package it. So he says, "Nimtza sheyishkoyach hagbola lahagbolas haseichel." It comes out that there's a power of limitation to limit the intellect. So it's not just, you don't just have a power to produce ideas. You have a power to produce and limit ideas. You have to say that, otherwise, to take an idea, where would you draw the line? How far would you go with that? Or if you want to communicate an idea, so as you understand it, how would you do that if it's your world of ideas and the other person's world of ideas are so far apart? How are you going to communicate your idea? So you have to say that it's built in, and not only that it's built in, this power. It's actually all coming from the same power to produce ideas. It's not there's power A is the power to produce ideas. Power B comes along and says, hey, you're going to take it, you're going to just produce ideas, and you're going to get messed up, you're going to get lost, you're going to get mixed up, you're going to get messed up, you don't know where it ends, you don't know where it begins, you don't know when it applies, you don't know when it does. You know what? Let's bring in power B. No, that's not how it works. It's the same koach hamaskil that has the power to produce ideas, has the power to produce ideas that are applicable to that situation, or how to, when to use it, when to, how to communicate it, how to pack. That's all coming from the koach hamaskil. All that's happening inside, and it's all happening from the koach hamaskil. The same source that produces the idea is the source that has the capacity to impose those necessary limits to be able to use the idea or communicate the idea.
Is that like a conscious process?
And it's all not a conscious process. I mean, you may find yourself in a situation where you're consciously aware that, okay, I need to define that better, right? Sometimes you when you're knocking on the door of the idea, source. Sometimes you have to, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, but I need to be able to define it a little better. So now you're working on defining it a little better. Where is it coming from? Where's your definition of the idea coming from? How do you know? It's coming from the same place that produced the idea is also producing the way to define it and contain it. Shemisham, it's from there, from the Koach HaMaskil itself. It comes the revelation of the Seichel to conceive of every conceptual thing. From there is also drawn the power of limitation, of boundaries, establishing borders and boundaries to impose the limits on the Seichel. This is the aspect of Chesed and Gvura that exists within the Koach HaMaskil, expression and restraint. The aspect of Chasodim within the Koach HaMaskil comes the power to reveal, the power of revelation to reveal to. And from the aspect of Gvura comes the power of Gvul, the power of a finite, a finitude to impose limits. So it's not that there's two separate forces at work here, and sometimes the self uses this force, it's not the sort of force producing ideas, and sometimes it uses this force of containing ideas and limiting ideas and then defining ideas. No, the same power to produce has within it that power. It's the same. The source of of self revelation, of self expression, is in and of itself the source of self restraint, of how much and when and where and how. That's the same. It's not two separate forces. You know what? I'm going to combine two different forces. No, it's the same Koach HaMaskil, the same power to produce the ideas. Also, the same has a limiting capacity. So we refer to it as Chesed and Gvura. That's within the Koach HaMaskil, but it's the Koach. It's both expressing this power, which is to both produce the idea and contain the idea, and work with those two abilities together. So he says, we'll use this, the model from this, using this as the model, as the analogy. We understood up above two names of Havaya and Elokim, that it's not two separate functions. It's not two separate. It's within that they both derive from. He himself is self-expressing and self-restraining. Self-expression and self-restraint are coming from the same thing. It's not two separate departments and two separate forces. It's one self that has the ability to express and restrain self, but it's all one self. Just like the power of revelation, which is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, is drawn from the essence of the Ein Sof. Sharei, as we mentioned before, that the light is attached to its source and is similar to its source, the light source, as mentioned before and as explained, because Moshe has explained elsewhere. So similarly, the power of finitude and constraint, which is the name of Elokim, is also drawn from Atzmus Ein Sof. They're not two separate ingredients, two separate forces, two separate entities. It's the self's capacity, it's the light's capacity to express and restrain. So it's, in fact, the way it's expressed in the Sefer Avodas HaKodesh, So he says, "V'hainu masha koiche b'gvul," which is what we refer to in language of Chassidus. We say that his koyach is b'gvul, as it says in the Sefer Avodas HaKodesh, which is a sefer written based on how to serve God based on Kabbalah, but it's more Kabbalistic than Chassidus and later. So he says the Ein Sof. He writes that the Ein Sof hu shleimus d'chayla. The Ein Sof is the ultimate shleimus of all shleimus. Kashem sheyesh lekerach b'bilti b'gvul, ken yesh lekerach b'gvul. Just like if his ultimate infinity, just like he has the power to operate on an infinite level, he also has the power to operate on a finite level. Shem taimar, because if you say sheyesh lekerach b'bilti b'gvul, ein lekerach b'gvul, you can say he only has the ability to operate on an infinite level, and he can't operate on a finite level. You are taking away from his ultimate perfection.
So he can make
just like he has the power to operate on the level of infinity, so too he has the power to operate on the level of finite. And in the same thing itself, to impose limits on that which is infinite. So Shem Elikim, and that is the union of the name Elikim. But that is the power of the Kerech HaGvul that's in the Ein Sof, Atzmusay Mahusay, in its very essence. And therefore, since the Shem Elikim is this Atzmus Ein Sof Mamash, it's just K'may Shem Havaya. It's just Atzmus Ein Sof expressing its Kerech B'Gvul. It has the ability to operate on the level of infinity, and the ability to operate on the level of finite, like you said in the Mashal, the Kerech HaMaskal, the Dugma of the Kerech HaMaskal. It has the capacity to produce ideas without end, conceivably. I mean, if a person lived long enough, and there's no limit to where, and yet it also imposes the limits on the same ideas that it produces. So Kiviyachal L'mayla, it is Ein Sof is Atzmus Ein Sof is expressing its power of self-restraint. If that's the case, that the Shem Elikim is this Bechin of Atzmus Ein Sof Mamash K'mei Shem Havaya, except that it's just the his Koyach B'Gvul, instead of his Koyach Bilti B'Gvul, and came over after Shem Elikim and Mastal Shem Havaya. So it's understood how the name Elikim does not cover up and conceal the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. We said before that they're opposites, because one is revelation and one is concealment. And in fact, the concealment of the name Elikim is that it covers up the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. He says, no, it can't be. Because it's impossible for an etzem to be masal etzem. Self can't cover up self. It has to do something outside of self to cover up self. Self can't cover up self. Just like a person can't hide behind himself. Can't cover himself up with himself. As it says in Shulchan Aruch Arech Chaim about the laws of covering the head, it's talking about davening, that it doesn't help covering his head with his hand. But if his friend puts his hand on your head, that could be counted as a covering in order to say a bracha, in order to. You can't use your own hand. You can't cover yourself with your own hand, because self doesn't cover up self. Somebody is understood up above in the name of Elikim that it is also an expression of Atzmus Ein Sof, that it does not conceal and cover and hide the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because a self cannot cover up and conceal itself. That's just as much an expression of his self, his self's ability to limit itself, to restrain itself. This is what we mean when we say Havaya. The Zohar means when he says Havaya and Elikim is Kul Echad, not that it's two separate functions and it's one operator that's operating two separate functions. No, that's self. Self itself has self-expression and self-restraint. That's actually self. That's not something outside of self, and I'm using both those things. It's God Himself is expressed in the ability to reveal and the ability to withhold. So make you maamar b'shem Elokim. Zeh davar Elokim kol echad shneim hem atzvus ein sof. It's so to the name Elokim, which is atzvus ein sof, does not cover up until the name Kavov ki de'netzem ma'ilum masal etzem chulu, because etzem self can't cover up self, and they're both equally self. Zeh davar Elokim kol echad shneim hem atzvus ein sof and mafkin klal. That's what we mean when we say that Avayim and the Kim Kul Echad, because they're both Atzvus and Sev, and they're not opposites at all. They may be opposites conceptually to the outsider, they're opposites. But when I'm trying to understand something, and in order to understand it, my mind comes up with an understanding. It also has to come up with how far does this go? Yeah. Otherwise, I don't really understand it. So it's not. I don't feel like I have to use two opposite things. No, that's just me understanding what I want to understand. I have to come up with the understanding and the insight and understanding. I also have to come up with the ability to, and that's all part of one thing. It's not, even though you can conceptually you could break it up into two separate things, and we do call it the Chesed of Gvura and the Kerech HaMaskel, but it's still all just an expression of the same thing. So he says they're not opposites. Because the name Elokim, even though it is the power of constraint and restriction, but it does not constrain and conceal at all the name Yud Kei Vav Kei.